Feels bad. Congratulations, TJ. You're the best caster for this round of the preliminaries. My name is Frodan, and I'm joined by Raven and Sottle on the desk, and it's time to begin our second series of the day. We have a really good match here between Deerjason and Napoleon. Napoleon is a person that people, well, they might know him from historical context of his conquest all over Europe, but Napoleon is a player who has been very active in the forums for a long time, and I think people are ready to see some new faces, Cydonia being one of them. Can we see another person perhaps rising up, or would Deerjason, a 2014 contender, be the one to take the series? Let's start off the discussion with you, Raven.
Yeah, I think what's interesting mainly about both of these players is they're bringing very sort of odd slants on decks. We see Deerjason bringing his aggressive Shaman list with the South Sea deckhands and the Stormforged Axe, which is nowhere near standard. And then we see on the other side of Napoleon bringing his Hunter list as well, which, you know, Hunter's becoming more and more popular in the past couple of weeks, but the inclusion of the Desert Camel. Sol, what do you think about that one?
And not only the inclusion of Desert Camel, it's not just Desert Camel with maybe some Fiery Bats, maybe a Timberwolf in there. He has gone full Jackie Chan. The injured Kvaldir is in there. And I don't know if you've heard the saying, Raven, but you never go full Jackie Chan.
I definitely never
Jackie
do.
Chan goes full Jackie Chan.
No. I don't trust Yogg enough. That's my problem with that.
I mean, Call of the Wild is a really powerful card. You're able to establish any semblance of board, which Hunter's gotten much better at. They're giving up more of their game-ending damage. They're running like 1 kill command. They're playing 2 deadly shots so that they can control the state of the board. Even things like Stranglethorn Tiger lays in wait if you set it up, and then you have Call of the Wild to help you push for that damage. I mean, for all intents and purposes, I think this is as controlling as a Hunter as we'll ever get from a control Hunter. So this is cool that we were able to see Hunter get very far in the tournament. In fact, I think you guys were talking about it. Didn't like 4 Hunter lists get through to the top 16 today?
Yeah, I think there's 4, right?
That sounds about right to me, yeah. It wasn't one of the most popular classes, but it has been one of the most successful in terms of percentage of people that have brought it that have got through.
So maybe he's onto something, and we'll see it. Game number 1, Napoleon versus Deerjason. I'm going to hand it off to Raven and Sottle.
Thanks a lot, Frodan. So we do have the first game, which is the Hunter. So that's always going to be nice to start off with. As you know, Sottle, I'm a bit of a fan of this class.
Yes, indeed. And generally, this is... It seems weird to say about a Hunter deck, which has classically been so aggressive and early game focused. Generally, topping out a high main was about the best they did, but it was all about that early game. But now, Hunter is a deck that kind of has the late game locked up, and you're really just hoping you're able to get through those early games turns. And Napoleon is going to do that pretty well here. He has the perfect Fiery Bat, Flame Juggler, Animal Companion curve. Yeah,
he has a really good start, but I'm really interested to see how the Camels potentially come into this matchup, because although amazing versus control decks, that was interesting, but although, I'll finish my point for a second. Although amazing versus control decks, as they don't normally run a lot of one-offs, you know, versus a deck like Zoo that has some of the most powerful one-drops in the game, you know, it can be very disastrous to just give your opponent a minion as well.
So, Turn 1 Forbidden Ritual. I played against this on ladder the other day. I queued into a Zoo who played Turn 1 Forbidden Ritual against me. And I wasn't entirely sure what I thought about it. After the initial shock of, that's weird, I kind of thought about whether that play was going to be correct or not. So I tweeted about it, asked, you know, guys, is this ever correct? You know, people who have played more Zoo than me in the new format, what do you think? The general consensus is that it isn't, because generally you'd be looking to have Abusive Sergeant or something in your opening hand that you'd use to trade it up with, but in which case you'd just play the Abusive Sergeant on turn 1 anyway. This is kind of a niche situation because he doesn't have a remaining curve, he just has that power overwhelming, so it looked like he was trying to leverage that 1-1 to trade up on the next turn.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely don't know what I think about it, especially since Unleash the Hounds is something we've seen being like cut a little bit, so it's not like, you know, Forbidden Ritual can be really strong to just refill the board, and there's much less fear of like the Knife Juggler Unleashed that we used to see in every single Hunter deck.
Yeah, I just looked away for a second there. Did the Elic draw the high main? That looks like what's happened here.
So Napoleon was very, very happy that high main versus Leroy came out. So he also has the knowledge that at the moment, Leroy isn't in the hand of DJ.
So this is a play when you're playing against Hunter that kind of puts the fear of God into you. You know that you need significant board dominance by turn 6 at this point now, because you know that high main is ready and waiting in hand. And that means that if you do not have board control by turn 6, that additional threat of the high main coming down is going to be crushing.
Yeah, and I think that's why Napoleon just went for the Animal Companion as well. He could have just Deadly Shot because, you know, the Councilman is a very scary minion to leave on the board. He could have Deadly Shot and got rid of it, but he wanted just more minions and keep control of the board. And again, this follow-up turn, he gets to play the Fiery Bat, kill off the Imp Gang Boss without spawning any tokens is huge, and Napoleon's just saying, just you wait till turn 6, and this game, this game's
wait
over.
till I have 6 mana. Yeah, Desert Camel is drawn here, but probably not going to have too big of an impact on this game. It is a risky card to play against Zoo. I think making a serious point and not just memeing on Jackie Chan about Desert Camel, it actually makes a little bit of sense right now, because one of the big drawbacks of Desert Camel previously was Zombie Chow. Yeah. You played Desert Camel, you ripped your opponent's Zombie Chow out of their deck for them, suddenly you haven't gained that much of an advantage. Zombie Chow is of course gone from standard format, so most decks are not playing powerful 1-drops in their lists at the moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, you know, other than like Zoo, Shaman maybe as well, and other hunters, there just aren't that many decks that are even playing 1-drops, and some other hunters aren't even playing 1-drops at all. They start the curve at 2 with like Doomsayers or something as well.
So there is Forbidden Ritual number 2 from Deerjason, desperately trying to get some board presence here. Napoleon draws the Injured Gvaldir, which is a card you pretty much never want to draw with this deck, but as I said, his curve looks like it bypasses that Desert Camel at this point. Looks like Tiger into High Main is just the line here. That Power Overwhelming looks incredibly juicy for a 1-1 into a 5-5, but unfortunately the kitty is hidden and we cannot interact with it.
Yeah, the stealth actually really come into play, and well, you know, one of the big benefits of this minion is, as you said, the opponent just can't interact with it, so it's almost a guaranteed play next turn. You know, you can get there some work done. As a base sort of 5-5, it's actually really powerful. I was wondering whether, because he had the Leok down, whether he could have gone with Huge Toad Desert Camel just to fill up the board. The opponent only gets a 1-drop, and the Leok can almost guaranteed kill a 1-drop except for Voidwalker on its own anyway, so you could sacrifice that to leverage a wider board, but he did actually just go for the target.
Yep, and this is the first turn where Jason's really been able to make one of those big Zoo tempo plays, use his combat tricks to create an advantage on the board with the trades. Has got himself back into it a little bit, but he knew what the play was going to be that turn. He saw it off the Elec, so he was expecting the high main. Now he has to find a way to deal with it. Does have the Power Overwhelming to start doing that.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting actually, because he can just Darkeye and Dwarf and potentially trade into the Stranglethorn Tiger.
My shield for
and then... he's going for the Argos. I thought he was going to trade and just say, I have my Councilman, you have your High Main, you know, and play a bit of a game of chicken, because Councilman can actually, you know, like get a bit out of control. But as I can tell by the look on your face, that, my friend, is Call of the Wild. Almost, well, perfectly in time for turn 8.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, drawing it on turn 7 is honestly almost the best turn to draw it, because you can then plan for it on turn 8. If you just rip it on turn 8, you can play to that out a lot, but having it on turn 7 means that you can set up your board and just say, hey, I'm just going to play my entire hand. Guess what my one remaining card is, my friend.
Yeah, having it on turn 7 means you can just have 7 minions on board. Let him trade a few. You know what? Make space for my Call of the Wild. I dare you.
Picks up the second Power Overwhelming. This is a big turn coming back from the Zoo. We saw a huge turn from the Hunter with the full board flood, but that enables the 0-mana Sea Giant. The double 0-mana Sea Giant, excuse me.
The free giant, of course.
Yeah, the double free giant, as Savitz was coining earlier
I was completely going to say stole from Savitz.
Yeah, credit where credit's due to the pun master, Yanni Savitz Mikkonen. Double Power Overwhelming doesn't really enable any good trades on this board right now, unless he wants to send the 1-1 into the Camel, which it looks like isn't something he wants to do. So it looks like just Darkeye and Dwarf is potentially going to come down here, and he's going to bank on that Double Power Overwhelming to try and pick up lethal on the following turn.
Yeah, this is actually a hell of a lot. It's not often you see 2 free Sea Giants go down and have the 2 POs in hand as well. So that's actually potentially a lot of damage. Harrison Jones not gonna do too much, but I'm pretty sure no matter what he drew this turn, it would not matter, as Call of the Wild is almost always the play on turn 8. And that actually looks
18?
like a lot of damage.
3, 6, 9, 13, 18 damage, yep. So a little bit off. Good for Deerjason that he was able to do a little bit of clearing that turn, or else he could have been in trouble if there was one additional minion in play that would have represented lethal. But he does get that taunt up against one of the Sea Giants, which now prevents the lethal coming back the other way from the Double Power Overwhelming.
Yeah, and we see Napoleon there almost become the Zoo player himself and do all the Zoo trades of just keeping everything just about alive to cause havoc for Deerjason here. And as you said, Misha causing also some havoc as it stops that. I mean, that is a lot of burst in hand, actually.
Yep, interesting. Deerjason has chosen to omit the Soulfire from his deck. Most people who are bringing a Leroy Jackson build... Oh, my God!
Was that
the
on
virus.
purpose?
The virus is spreading. No, that was an
my
accident.
God.
The Leroy Jenkins build, my apologies, of Zoo are favoring that one Soulfire at least. Soulfire would have actually been a lethal draw on that turn. He could have played his 2-power Overwhelmings first to buff up his Sea Giant damage, and then Soulfired the Taunt out of the way. But he's chosen to cut the Soulfire for more consistent minions. He has a Bran in here, which is something you don't always see these days. So he didn't have any outs that turn for lethal, as far as I can see it.
He would have definitely liked to Defender Vargas, though, and Animal Companion could very easily give him lethal here, and it doesn't.
That is the only one
Yeah.
that did not give him lethal, as I'm sure Napoleon is now screaming to himself internally. But he is going to have to evaluate the state of the board right now, because he can just put his opponent on hero power lethal next turn if he would like to. But that does leave you at some serious risk on the board.
Yeah, these trades are really awkward as well, because nothing particularly lined up too well. Always, overcommitting damage. So a little bit unfortunate there for Napoleon, but he's still in a very strong position. As we can see, there's only 3 power Overwhelmings in hand. Well, that would be nice if Misha wasn't there.
It certainly would, but I just want to point out I like the play from Napoleon a lot. It represents very, very good discipline. I think a lot of people may have been tempted to go more all in there, try and push a lot more damage, but you have that hero power and you have the board advantage right now. So as you have inevitability as a hunter, essentially. It's something that a lot of classes don't get. As long as you just keep getting to press that hero power every turn, you will get there eventually, as long as you don't die yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And with Zoo as well, you can actually just win regardless of all that by just not letting them ever have a board,
Right.
as then you're only really bothered about the burst potential of Leroy. And at 22 health, he's very safe, as well as having Misha on board as the taunt. So I completely agree. It was a really strong play and just sets up almost guaranteed lethal next turn anyway. Because there's still a few cards he could draw. We've not seen quick shots or kill commands, I believe, yet.
So Deerjason is in a rather awkward spot here. If he life taps, he's dead to the board. There's 7 plus the hero
He's
power,
going for it,
which
though.
would be 9. So I'm interested into... You saw him very, very carefully sort of looking up to the upper right corners of his eyes, considering his outs. So he must have thought of a card that he specifically wanted to life tap into there. I can't particularly see what that would have been.
With a second Defender Vargas.
Could he have played
saved him?
Leroy Jenkins that turn for lethal? He could have done, right? He had enough mana.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking like he could have waited 1 turn, and then the turn after he potentially has 2 draws for Leroy to tap with the power Overwhelmings, but he considered his outs. He decided he just wanted to tap there, go for the play, didn't pick it up. Knife Juggler, I think, was the draw, not good enough, and very well played. Camel Hunter looking actually very impressive. Sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the strongest parts of that game for Napoleon was the fact that Elic pulled the high main, because that just straight away tells your opponent, I have high main on 6. You need to be prepared for this, and if you're not, it's just going to be too powerful and just win the game.
Yeah,
so it just made the plays like when you put in your mind of your opponent that like high main is happening on 6. It's not something
Right.
you've got to like, okay, I'm just going to presume he might not have it and just make this play. It's like, no, I know he has it.
Yeah, and the jouster from the opponent, as you said, was the Leroy. So those 2 copies of High Main are the only minions in his deck that would have won that joust. Otherwise, he just wouldn't have got the card draw at all.
Unfortunately, you cannot joust Call of the Wild.
Thank God.
That would definitely be a lot of fun for the Hunter player, probably not for their opponent. But there are still some interesting decks left. There's there's still the Shaman banned from Deerjason, so we won't see his hyper aggro Shaman. I'm not really sure what we're calling this list at the moment, as it's still in flux, I imagine. But the Warrior also banned for Napoleon, so he's not going to be able to play his mid-range Warrior, which I believe I think a lot of people are pretty confident is just one of the best decks as an all-rounder at the moment.
Yeah, mid-range Warrior, tempo Warrior, it's very much like old school combo druid in the sense where it's more or less 45 to 60% against the field. Even your bad matchups are fairly winnable. You have some blowout matchups in your favor, but it's just a very strong, solid, consistent mid-range deck that has very solid lineups. It's not particularly complex to play, so you can play it very effectively in a high-pressure environment. So I think it does very effectively fill the gap left by mid-range druid, but without quite having that oppressive burst damage at the end. It's a little bit more honest in its board development.
That old playing around 14 plus damage from turn 9, or maybe even earlier, is kind of rough. How do you... Oh, we're about to go into the game. I was just about to ask as well, how do you think his rogue is going to line up against the rest of the field now?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Napoleon's rogue comes up against a potential freeze mage, which can be a problem, comes up against the zoo as well, which could potentially be a problem. So I think, honestly, this is one of the better matchups that he could have got for his rogue. So I think he's done well with his Q order here to get into a pretty good matchup. But that card in the hand right now, Ragnaros Firelord, is one of the key cards in this matchup. I don't think it's as important in this match that you have to keep it, like, say, N'Zoth Paladin, where it's more or less the only card that matters in the matchup outside of Forbidden Healing, but it's so many games in this matchup do get decided by turn 8 Ragnaros. Either whether it's enough pressure to push lethal, or whether it kills or does not kill a concealed Gadgetzan Auctioneer.
Yeah, or even just soaking up too many resources for the rogue. Because something, especially as the mid warrior, you can still actually gain quite a lot of armor.
Yeah.
And something they might struggle with is just, you know, you only have X amount of damage, and if you have to soak so much damage, it's not really like sapping Ragnaros feels like a great play most of the time. But the opening hand's actually pretty good for both players.
Particularly, I think, for Deerjason, this is a fantastic looking hand here. He has the Fiery War Axe to answer a potential 3-3. He can then tempo out with that weapon on a following turn to take out a Tomb Pillager or an Azure Drake, using that ping to do the 1 extra damage. He has Bloodhoof Brave for a solid minion to develop. And he has that Harrison Jones for some card draw and to deny some tempo from the rogue weapon as well. So his hand is looking very, very rosy right now.
Yeah, and how often would you say you actually just go for the Harrison on a potential 1 durability dagger with no deadly poison, just to keep the sort of speed up if you don't really have another turn 5 play, for example?
If you don't have another minion to develop, I think you absolutely take it. Just use it as an Azure Drake. That's totally fine. You know, an Azure Drake with an extra point of damage, sure. Most of the rogue decks are limiting the deadly poisons that they have, so that's not a big deal. Obviously, no Tinker Oil in the format anymore. So I think that's absolutely reasonable just to slam it on a 1-1 dagger, but you're looking for a 1-2. If you get the Dream Deadly Poison as well, then that's fantastic.
As you said, is looking pretty decent for Napoleon as well, though. You know, he has all the early stuff you just want in a lot of matchups as Rogue, you know, the backstab SI, and quite importantly, the coin as well, which is very important in for Rogue overall. And even the Violet Teacher can be kind of awkward for the warrior to deal with.
Yeah, the Violet Teacher is really nice here. It's a hard read for Napoleon to make because you're scared of Slam in this situation. The second Blood to Ichor being picked up is a big deal because, as I described the way these hands could interact, the Fiery War Axe plus Blood to Ichor play was to deal with 4 health mid-game minions, the Tomb Pillagers and the Azure Drake. Doesn't quite interact with the Violet Teacher in the way he would like, but that second Blood to Ichor is a very big deal on that front.
Yeah, Deerjason now being able to get the Bloodhoof Brave down, and I think the next turn or so we might even just see the Harrison, because I think what the warrior wants to do now is to just stay 1 step ahead constantly of the rogue and just always keep the minion on board and make the rogue answer every single turn. And then when you get to cards like Cairn and Ragnaros and Varian as well, you know, it just becomes too much for the rogue and just you just overpower them on the board.
Yeah, Deerjason has actually gotten a little bit quicker with his build of mid-range warrior. He doesn't have the Varian in there. He tops out at Ragnaros. No refarm, no Varian, so doesn't have that huge threat at the end, but still, the analysis is spot on. You need to have board dominance before your big threats start coming down. Otherwise, your individual big threats are too vulnerable to sap, and the rogue can just swing themselves back into the game.
Yeah, we did see Harrison go down as well, which drew into one of those big threats, the main one we were talking about, into the Ragnaros. And Napoleon now having a lot of tokens on board as he does backstab the Harrison there. And he does actually have a pretty easy way to deal with Bloodhoof. Sometimes you just can't deal with that guy.
Yeah.
And like that half dealing with it, you know, like, okay, I'll damage it and then deal with it next turn. A lot of the time feels terrible because, as we can see, it does get enraged to deal 5 damage as well. So did get rid of it pretty nicely, used the tokens to clear up the Harrison, and suddenly Napoleon is on a pretty strong board.
Certainly is. Deerjason will be begging for a Ravaging Ghoul just about now. Doesn't pick one up. Does have an Acolyte, which he can cycle a bunch of cards with those Blood to Ichors, but the Violet Teacher might just demand an answer here. He has the option to play something like Blood, Fierce Monkey, be able to take out the Violet Teacher and get a pretty competitive board. He essentially gets himself a 2-2 for every 1-1 that's in play, and then has a 3-4 to dominate the 3-3 as well. So it's a very, very competitive looking board.
Yeah, this was really important for Deerjason here to be able to just build the board back up, because if he was forced into just like playing Cairn, there's just like a straight up sap as he does come into his hand potential. But also, Azure Drake into Prep Fan just swings the board back in Napoleon's favor, and again it's just yet another turn where it's like, okay, the Tempo Warrior is now got no board, does have the weapon to clear up the SI potentially, but and then just always going to be 1 step behind. Cairn's going to come down, but as we said, we can see the sap already in hand, and that is a huge turn loss.
Napoleon actually physically punched the air at seeing Cairn Bloodhoof hit the board.
Oh, incredible.
He's going to cycle the shiv, but this is the feeling of a rogue player. You have double sap in hand, you are begging your opponent to play clunky minions like Cairn. Napoleon celebrates quite rightly. He knows how much this means. If he wins this game, he is 1 game away from America's championship, and his emotions are coming out quite rightly now.
Yeah, both these players very sort of active on camera, but even the SI setup to follow up was perfect. Much better than Dagger. Grom is going to come down now to deal with his Drake. There is
Not
Leroy
good
and
enough.
Abyss in hand though.
Leroy FS is going to wrap this game up. Napoleon is riding his wave of emotion. He is picking up all the momentum right now. And despite that fantastic-looking opening hand from Deerjason, I think that Violet Teacher just proved to be so key. He played it down on a turn. Deerjason did have the possibility to answer it with the double blood to Ica, as I described, but he just felt like Harrison was just a much stronger play on that turn, which I almost certainly agree that it was. But then that let that Violet Teacher stick for the turn, develop the board, and the game swung from there, and honestly also swung hugely on that preparation draw, which was kind of disgusting. A little bit of sick actually came up in my mouth.
Wow, that's a little bit extreme for me. I was more okay with it personally, but also it was kind of crazy that that's one of the few games the Warrior doesn't have a Whirlwind effect from Ghoul or Whirlwind itself. All the time you're building up these 1-1s and you're just saying, well, yeah, the Warrior plays at least 3 Whirlwind effects normally, so the odds are it's going to come down and clear up the board, which would have made it much easier to come back from. But again, the Warrior just wasn't able to just keep anything stuck on the board as Napoleon managed to just clear everything up very easily, and it looks like he is just left with his Shaman. So it's a mid-range list, but if I was him, I'd be feeling pretty happy about this. The Shaman's in a fairly strong position against the field at the moment.
Shaman is a difficult deck to 3-0 for sure. It's a hard deck to come back against. Honestly, having looked at the last series, though, I would say the same thing, perhaps even more so. Freeze Mage is a very difficult deck to 3-0 because it's so polarized.
Yeah.
There's a chance that you have 1 or 2 decks in your lineup that Freeze Mage just beats. And we saw in the last series that just because you are unfavored in matchups, just because you're playing against a deck that's kind of odds on to pick up a win, you're odds on, but there are still odds on the other side that you can come back. And that is what Jason will be counting on in this situation. He knows he has an uphill battle, but he also knows how important this is, the stakes that are on the line. And there isn't much to this at this point. He has to win with all 3 of his decks. He has to beat the same deck every time. So he just has to mentally compose himself, plan out how he feels best doing about this. That's really the only consideration here. And then just go 1 game at a time.
We are going to see which deck he is picking first, because this always interests me. When you're in this situation, you have 3 decks to choose from. Yeah. Do you go with the one you think you've got the best chance with, the worst chance? It's really I think it's a really interesting insight into the mental state of the player.
Right, this is exactly what I'm saying. There is almost 0 strategical consideration in this point in terms of what you play first, because the only thing that you fall back on in situations like this is revealing information, and that is not a factor in a revealed deck list format. So it's entirely a mental thing about, what do I feel most comfortable with here? How am I going to go about doing this?
Yeah, and Deerjason must be feeling pretty comfortable at the moment with his opening hand, as he has the Flame Imp into potential Peddler or Juggler, Coin Gang Boss, everything he really needs to open up against the Shaman here.
And I'll tell you what is a really big deal right here. I was about to say this matchup very often comes down to how many Lightning Storms you are running in your mid-range Shaman. Napoleon is running a number which he would probably be regretting a little bit just about now. He is running 0 Lightning Storms in his mid-range Shaman, which is going to give him some serious issues against Zoo specifically, but may help him out in some of the matchups later on.
Yeah, I think in control matchups you don't really care too much, and that's probably the reasoning. I'm presuming the overall format is going to favor control, so I'm going to just absolutely demolish that with this deck. But I agree, the lack of Lightning Storms, I mean, 1 Lightning Storm can pretty much just win you this matchup pretty easily.
Yes, indeed, but there are threats for days. Fully respect the Hex on the Darkshire Councilman. It's pretty much the biggest threat in Zoo's deck these days. There's no Doom Guards that you Hex in most people's lists. Everyone's just running Leroy, which only really comes out when it kills you.
I was going to say, Hexing Leroy might be a little bit too late.
Yeah, so the 3-drop may not seem like the best target to Hex, but it is one of the biggest threats in the deck, so it makes a lot of sense. And he's just going to go for Temple Primal Fusion here, just to be able to make a more competitive board. But you can see already Napoleon already shaking his head here. He knows this game's very quickly going away from him, and this is a mental consideration for him, honestly, because he has to stay composed.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we've seen, he's very, very emotional about the game, which is fantastic, but I think he needs to keep in his mind, he has 3 goes at this, right? Yeah. 1 game might not go well, but you've got 2 more, and just odds on that you're going to draw really well and play well one of those games and take the win. So he just needs to stay confident. He's completely not out of it yet as he plays the thing from below for pretty nice 3-mana 5/5 taunt. Always feels pretty good.
Does seem very solid. The Abusive Sergeant that was picked up from the Dark Peddler here, though, is going to be absolutely destructive to this. Has the Sea Giant to follow up. And this is the one thing that can make you regret using a Hex. Of course, we saw from Deerjason he's running double Sea Giant in his list, so I guess there's slightly more consideration to holding onto a Hex than usual, but I think he had to react to that Darkshire Councilman in the way that he did. Does get punished by the Sea Giant, and I think we will see Napoleon scooping out of this game sooner rather than later here.
Yeah, and again, I completely agree. I think there we go. In defense of the Hex, the second you let Darkshire Councilman just chill on the board, is you lose to that instead
it just
of the
becomes a Sea Giant anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So definitely a rough matchup there for Napoleon. But again, as we said, 2 more games. He's got the Warrior and the Freeze Mage to play against. So still got to be feeling pretty confident. I think the Warrior matchup is probably the most interesting to me because it can very much swing either way, similar to the way the Warrior and Rogue One went.
Absolutely. And I just want to point out, I really like the way Napoleon handled that. He's emotional. We've seen him. He's expressive and emotional. I think when you are an expressive and an emotional player, there's no point trying to contain that when you're playing a high-pressure situation. The correct way to handle it is usually just to do you. If you're an emotional guy, let yourself be emotional. If you're stone-faced Oskaka, then continue to be stone-faced Oskaka. But he was still emotional there, but you saw he wasn't really fully invested in that game. He saw it was lost very early, so he kind of mentally checked out of it a little bit, conceded as soon as he could. He knows he still has more solid chances to win coming up.
And we are going into Game 4. Both of these guys probably feeling as nervous as they've ever felt in their lives as they are playing for that top 8 spot into the the Spring Championship, sorry. So Deerjason got to be feeling good though. Got the win on the board in a very, very convincing fashion, and now he's got his Warrior versus the Shaman again.
He does indeed. Does have the Fiery War Axe, picks up a couple of early threats to go with it. But we are seeing here another very powerful curve from Napoleon, and this is absolutely the correct line here. Totem Golem is a much more beneficial play for you in this situation for a couple of reasons. One, the obvious one, you play around Fiery War Axe. That's just a great thing to do here. You play the Tunnel Trog, it gets axed immediately. But also, he has the 3-mana Tuskar Totemic in his hand. So he wants to overload on turn 1, and then not overload on turn 2, so he can curve out naturally into the Tuskar Totemic.
Yeah, and also the fact that he does have the 1-drop, right? So he can fill out that curve very easily. He doesn't gain the overload, but as you said, the advantages just outweigh the disadvantages in that play. So again, I really like it. And we can see the Master of Evolution in hand. What do you actually think about that card in the Shaman deck? I've had very mixed feelings about it, to be honest.
Yeah, Master of Evolution exists in kind of this floating spot in the deck where people haven't really decided what's optimal yet, I think. That's one of the byproducts of a new format is decks are constantly evolving. Even though we have some established strong archetypes already, the optimal builds aren't quite there yet. We're talking about things like 1 or 2 Primal Fusions, 1 or 2 Lightning Bolts, and then there's this 4-mana slot that's sometimes Argus, sometimes Master of Evolution, sometimes Draenei Totem Carver is a card that I know the Complexity guys, Crane and myself, have been running a lot. So it's a flexible option, but Master of Evolution, the average stats that you gain from an evolution effect actually aren't that high overall because of the presence of Battlecry minions in the game, which generally have lower stats, but still it can be a big blowout on a lot of turns.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, I ran 1 as the only 4-drop in my list for a while, and then I decided I want to run a 4-mana 7/7 instead, so I just swapped it out for that and was like, yeah, this feels good.
So, yeah, we do see he is now able to develop the Tuskar Totemic, but since he's staring back at that Fiery War Axe, he's going to want some board presence. He does shake his head at that. That's actually not a bad pull here, because in theory, it makes it competitive against that 1/1 Armorsmith, but there is the Bloodhoof Brave coming down to stop that.
Yeah, I think it's like mixed reactions. It beats the Armorsmith, but also with this deck, you want your totems to stick, because that's how you build up pressure a lot of the time. We do see the Evolution go down, and hey, 0-mana spells are pretty good. Especially when you can combo them and just kill off the Bloodhoof.
That is a really, really strong roll from Napoleon there. He does now have the option to just answer this Bloodhoof Brave straight up if he wants to.
I think
would leave him very low on resources in hand. He has Harrison, which is a sometimes refill for his hand. Already 1 War Axe has been used, so you know there's just 1 War Axe left for sure. There's the Arathi Weaponsmith as well, if Deerjason is running that.
And also there's the Doomhammer off Malkorok, right?
And the inevitable Doomhammer that comes from Malkorok. So there is a high percentage that Harrison Jones gets to draw you some cards, but it's not guaranteed to draw you cards anytime soon. But he is valuing the tempo on the board because, as Brian Kibler would agree, this is a matchup between 2 very tempo-based decks.
Oh god. So I'm not even going to join in on that one, but
good call.
But yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I do think though he can probably afford to just hold off on the Harrison because he has the Flame Tongue totem to buff up, like the minions already on the board to be able to trade up to anything big, and also he's probably okay just hitting totem for a turn or so as long as he can control the other side of the board from the warrior.
Yep, Frothing Berserker, a little bit of tempo on the board from Deerjason's side, but still, this board is now lost. He can develop the Manatide Totem, can Napoleon to get some of that cycle that he was in desperate need of, honestly, having used 2 0-mana spells essentially from his hand on the previous turn, but he's going to go for the more value trades on the board that lets him keep his 6/2 around, keep the Manatide Totem for a later turn.
Yeah, that's really interesting because personally, I was eyeing up the Manatide Totem, actually, and you just keep the Sorcerer's Apprentice on the board, because you can still do weird things with the spells you have left in your deck.
Yeah, it makes sense. That he is kind of running low on spells. There's no Lightning Storm in there. He does have only 1 Feral Spirit, I believe, as well, and having just used Lightning Bolt and Rockbiter, it's a very minion-based remainder of his deck, to be perfectly honest, so there isn't probably that much consideration going on. Harrison Jones has now been picked up by Deerjason, though, which means that if there is a Doomhammer drawn from Napoleon, we could see a huge blowout here, but now both Rockbiters have been used. The value of a Doomhammer to Napoleon is greatly mitigated, so we might even see him, if he draws it, choose just to hold on to it to prevent that blowout. That's definitely a play you can make. It's within your range when you know 100% of the time there is a Harrison Jones in your opponent's deck.
Yeah, completely agree. Napoleon does get the extra draw there into the Flame Juggler. Probably a little bit upset that he's not rolled the Healing Totem, as he can clear off the 6/1 instead with that AoE from the Ghoul.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Slam draw there, being able to cycle him an additional card. My eyes missed the Arathi Weaponsmith just for a second there. Obviously a much better option, uses his mana much more effectively. Flame Juggler comes out here, isn't going to have a big impact. Deerjason ushered that shot towards his face, and it worked out perfectly. Ooh. The Harrison Jones does come out.
How
the
interesting.
Doomhammer
the Harrison Jones is the one that draws the Doomhammer.
Right. Harrison Jones dug into his museum collection and pulled out one of his many Doomhammers from the deck, handed it to Napoleon.
Yeah. And now his evil clone is going to probably, return it back to the museum as well.
Yeah, I said holding on to the Doomhammer is a play that can be within your range when you know Harrison is a possibility. When it's the only card in your hand, that becomes a much more difficult play to make.
Yeah, I could Doomhammer or just Totem Pass.
Right.
So there are options here for Deerjason on to how much he wants to clear off the board here. He can use the minions or just go into the Execute instead. He is actually just going to trade the Ghoul and clear off the Flame Tongue.
Yep, and so Jason does have a couple of options here to fill out the rest of his mana. Fierce Monkey doesn't look particularly competitive on the board right now, but Execute Blood to Ichor equally so. He is going to go for the Fierce Monkey. It does get eaten immediately by that Harrison Jones, but it does also protect the Frothing Berserker from a similar fate. Thunderbluff Valiant doesn't really change the equation in terms of being able to deal with that Frothing Berserker. Yes, it does. What the hell am I talking about? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, he does be able to buff the totem that he's already on the board, so he actually is going to look like he's going to put Harrison into there and put the two attack minions into the Frothing. Remove that guy off the board, because any time I've seen that guy live for a while, he wreaks havoc a lot of the time. And also the Stoneclaw totem coming up for Napoleon on the hero power is actually probably one of the best ones he could have got.
Yeah, Stoneclaw Totem on the turn where you activate Thunderbluff Valiant is always a great feeling. You get that natural protection for your Thunderbluff Valiant, which can bring so much more additional value to your totems. But the Korkron is an equally good draw from Deerjason, allowing him to finally take board dominance here.
Oh my god.
But Napoleon right now, look at these two hands right now. One card left remaining in each person's hands, and they interact very, very favorably towards one individual.
Yeah, there we go.
That individual is not named Napoleon.
Yeah, the double fist pump from Deerjason. He's like, look, we're basically, one-on-one in card size, card hand size, and we're just gonna blow this one out with 6 card draw from Harrison and Napoleon again. But I kind of love watching both these players on camera, to be honest.
Yeah,
they are very entertaining.
Great. And just look at this stack of cards building up now for Jason. God. Every threat in his deck, and I have never seen a more smug look on a man's face than Deerjason right now. He knows this one is in the bag. Bloodlust and a Dream for Napoleon right now, although that Dream did summon him a Fire Elemental, but that's not going to do enough against these four health minions on board. We are going to yet another Game 5. I made the comment yesterday, it seems like every series I'm casting is going to Game 5. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I was going to say, fine by
exciting
me.
series, yeah. Can't wait. So what is Game 5 going to come down to here? We're going to see the mid-range Shaman versus the Freeze Mage.
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup, actually, because a lot of the time, if the Freeze Mage can't quite clear off the board repeatedly, because as the Shaman, you really can just build up the board quite easily through just hero power, and you don't need to put too much pressure on. You're always threatening cards like Bloodlust to just burst the Mage down, maybe even prot the block. That becomes very easy with some other cards, like he's running Lightning Bolt and Rotbiter Weapon as well.
Primal Fusion.
Primal Fusion is very silly. You can put like 10, 12 attack totems or something silly like that, which is brilliant. And Burst that comes out of nowhere, which is, I think, key in this matchup. And the Mage just has to be, very prepared for it and hopefully just draw the freezes. And I think an early Doomsayer into maybe Frost Nova is going to be pretty vital for this game.
Absolutely, and everything is on the line in this game. This is Game 5. This is a qualification match. This is a chance to go to the Americas Championship for both of these players. For Deerjason, it may be the most important game of Hearthstone he's played since 2014. For Napoleon, probably the biggest game he's played in his entire life. Everything is on the line. I wouldn't be surprised if they're both just taking a moment right now to think about every single thing they have ever learned about the Shaman versus Freeze Mage.
Just about life.
About life, the universe, and everything. They will both be consulting Douglas Adams immediately.
Definitely, and it's just one of those. It's just, the match will just mean everything to these players. We can see it on their faces as well as we do go into the Game 5. As there you go, deep breaths already from DJ. It's like, right, I'm just gonna breathe. I got this. And this is literally everything for both these players. But the loser of this match does go into the lower bracket. So they are not knocked out of the tournament. They do have a chance, but obviously it's much more difficult playing a couple more games as opposed to just taking this win and going straight into top 8.
Yeah, it's still a crushing experience to be this close and then suddenly have your work cut out for you again with more series. I think especially for both of these guys who appear to be quite emotional players, that'll be a bitter pill to swallow, so they'll have to recover. But the early Doomsayer draw from the Freeze Mage here is huge. This is almost game-winning against the pure aggro Shaman if you can deny minion damage early with the Doomsayer. Not so much against the mid-range list, which can go into the later turns with you, but any technique you have to stall the game is in your favor as the Freeze Mage, because this is not a list that can outlast you. There's no healing in mid-range Shaman. So if you can pull together your win condition as the Freeze Mage, it is a solitaire matchup in that sense. They cannot stop your win condition.
Yeah, one of the small, sort of silver linings Napoleon can take out of that is he did have Flame Juggler as a 2-drop, but then not much to follow up with after at that point. So it's not like he lost into the Totem Golem into potential Fell Spirit after. So he didn't have the quickest opening, but he's probably okay with that. Just working on dropping those totems for the thing from below, which can be really powerful, as it's very difficult for the mage to remove.
Yeah, coining out a totem there is essentially delayed use of the coin to coin out Thing from Below. If you want to think about it that way, it lets him play Thing from Below on turn 4. It's essentially coining out Thing from Below this turn. Loot Hoarder comes down on board, not competitive, but that's not what this is about for Freeze Mage. He's actually going to go for the Mana Tide here, just to give an awkward problem for the Freeze Mage to deal with and try and draw into those additional resources he needs. Those big late game bombs like the Doomhammer, the Thunderbluff Valiant, the Bloodlust, the cards that he's going to need to burst through this life totem.
Yeah, I actually really like the Mana Tide because, as you said, you do need to draw into your answers, and having a full hand is really key, as it's the only sort of guaranteed draw mechanic the Shaman has. And also, as you said, the 3 health, it's just so awkward. Like, if that totem eats a Frostbolt, you're pretty damn happy with that outcome, I think.
Yep, and Napoleon is choosing to play this a little bit slowly. He could have used the Flame Tongue totem to push some extra damage there instead of the Hero Power totem. Would have had the same effect on being able to play Thing from Below. But he's going for the long-term value here, building up his board of totems. As you said, they can be very irritating, and they do represent genuine threats in this deck because of the cards that we've discussed multiple times.
Yeah, something Napoleon will have to keep in mind, though, is sometimes it's very easy to fill the board, and then you're not actually pressuring your opponent in terms of damage outside of a Bloodlust. And if you don't have the Bloodlust in hand yet, you definitely don't want to just overcommit and suddenly like, oh, I actually just can't play a minion. My opponent's just freezing turn after turn. But obviously, as I say the word Bloodlust, it does come into Napoleon's hand. So now he can start planning around this. And there's even potential that, you take your Bloodlust where you can get it and maybe planning to go for next turn, regardless of potentially, proccing an ice block or putting them down to lethal range.
And Napoleon respects Flame Strike from his opponent there by trading into the Loot Hoarder. Generally, you want to be as aggressive as possible against Freeze Mage, but leaving that Loot Hoarder up on the board would mean that Flame Strike wipes out the 5/5 as well as the rest of his board. So just respecting his opponent's options there, takes out the 2/1. He is starting to build a very, very oppressive board now. And he can honestly unleash a Bloodlust at kind of any point he feels like here, just to get that damage in at some point.
Exactly, you want to just cash it in when you can, because the damage outside of really Alexstrasza range is always permanent to a certain extent.
Yep.
So you just kind of play Bloodlust when possible, because if he tries to hold off, and then the board gets cleared, suddenly he needs like 3 more turns to build the board up again to a point where Bloodlust is, it's super impactful.
Absolutely. He's choosing how he wants to respect these trades on the board right now. He has 2 opportunities to try and pick up a Healing Totem, although he doesn't have the board space for it. So Healing Totem would reward the trades here, but again, that 1/1 represents a menace to his 5/5 if there was a Flame Strike in his opponent's hand. So he does feel like he has to respect it. Flame Strike plus ping is not a play that can be made just yet, but he is going to use the Tunnel Troll to go into it. That 1 damage loss is not a big deal. Breaks through the ice barrier, starts pushing a sizable amount of damage now. Now we're getting to the point where this board really does demand answers from Deerjason.
Yeah, I mean, just the 2/5/5 alone with the Bloodlust is 16 damage just from those 2 minions. Never mind the rest of the board, and Doomhammer coming into hand is yet another source of a high volume of damage, but over the course of a few turns, of course. The Blizzard into Doomsday is actually pretty strong, as there is a Hex to answer it, but again, it just slows you down. Just every single turn Deerjason can buy is going to be super important here.
Because of the makeup of Napoleon's hand here, though, it really doesn't slow him down all that much. Hex into Doomhammer is pretty much the perfect play here. Can start pushing that repetitive damage with the Doomhammer. Still 2 Rockbiters left in his deck, I believe, which will represent huge amounts of damage. So his hand is looking pretty positive right now, but the offensive Alexstrasza comes out. Only the Frostbolt Ice Lance to follow it up, but the Antonidas is there to cast with it, which essentially gives him a 2-turn lethal from this point. There is an Ice Block in play. This is starting to look very sketchy.
Yeah, this is just how quickly this game can swing, and because he does have those cards available, he can just combo that with Antonidas, as you said, and as we mentioned earlier, there's no healing for the Shaman list, so this is going to be very, very tough for Napoleon to sort of come back out of, if even possible.
Yeah, he would have to pop the block this turn and deal with that Alexstrasza. Theoretically, that's what he will feel like he needs to do, and because of the overload on the previous turn due to the Doomhammer, he does not have the ability to cast both Hex and Bloodlust on this turn.
Yeah, can he Bloodlust proc the block? Because obviously he won't know this, but Deerjason doesn't have the second block in hand.
Right.
And I don't think he's not dead next turn, right? Because the Alexstrasza, well, the Frostbolt will have to go
this
into
specific hand,
against,
no, he is not
exactly.
dead.
Against, so he will actually Oh, okay. He's going to trade into the Alexstrasza.
Yeah, he's found a way to do both here. Because of the trade, he gets 2 extra damage with the Flame Tongue Totem sliding over. So now he actually has perfect removal plus Ice Block. This is the play that he needed to find the answer. As I said, his goal was kill Alex, pop the block. That's the maximum disruption that you can give to the Freeze Mage here. He found it. Extremely well played from Napoleon. Arcane Intellect is picked up here, but that means that Deerjason is going to need to find Ice Block and find a way to set himself up a win condition right now.
Yeah, there's Thanos, there's Fireball. Neither of those are Ice Block. He can still ping Thanos and just about squeeze in the Ice Block, but at that point, all it does is just delay the game 1 more turn, and I don't know if that 1 more turn will actually even be enough for this.
Right. Freeze Mage late game is all about finding the amount of turns you need. If you spend 1 entire turn just stalling, that turn may as well have not existed because you haven't moved towards a win condition. So sure, he can find an Ice Block here. That doesn't set him up a win condition. So Deerjason, before he makes that last gasp emergency play, will be trying to invent a different line that actually sets him up a win condition. Fireball, Frostbolt, Ice Lance in hand is only 13 damage. That does not get him there. So it looks like the Blood Mage is going to come down. Is he going to try and find a way to stall this board out? I don't think he even can. He has 2 freeze effects.
Yeah, and 3 forms of damage to try and deal with. I was just saying, no matter which way he does this, either the Doomhammer's available or one of the minions.
That is the wrong secret. He plays it to bluff it anyway, but it's not going to be good enough. As long as Napoleon commits through these attacks, which I'm sure he will, Napoleon, after being pegged back to 2-2, is going to book his spot at the Americas Championship. Throws out the emo. He's been emotional the whole way throughout this series. He's letting his emotions get carried away a little bit right now.
And even the well played from Deerjason, just like, yeah, you know what, good game, like it happened.
Wow, that fist, the double fist bump.
I'm surprised he's not got up and done a victory lap for this one now, as Napoleon is going to book his spot in the top 8. Well.
Sup, Dan?
Hey.
Not much, man. That was some entertaining Hearthstone.
Hey, you make your bed and then you lie in it, right? Deerjason has been throwing out some emotes at people the whole tournament. Now he's on the receiving end, so just got to suck it up and take it, I guess.
It's true, and with this win, Napoleon gets his ticket into the championship happening next month. Job well done. Now that we've had a time to reflect, do we like that Hunter deck a lot more? I mean, we always speculate whether or not if we had an extra day for deck list submission, maybe we see more Hunters. Do you think that played even to the favor of these Hunter players too, because they were more unique with how they brought it and slid it in instead of playing Hunter mirrors, for example?
Yeah, early adopters always get rewards, right? And the people that have picked up the Hunter that one extra day early just before everyone else caught onto it feel like they've been rewarded in this tournament. Obviously, that was a slightly unique list going along the Desert Camel line, but as I pointed out during the game, there's no Zombie Chow in standard format anymore, so your opportunity to get punished by Desert Camel are very diminished, so it looks like a pretty strong pick.
Yeah, overall, I've just been very impressed with how there's not only just been Hunters, but that series also had 6 different classes that were played across all of the games. So a great amount of diversity and a great accomplishment for Napoleon. Now, Deerjason, I feel like in the end, he's going to fall down to the lower bracket to play someone else, the winner of one of those top 12 matches. But I still feel like he's on the cusp of here having a breakout performance. I think our admin, who's been watching players like Jason for a while, she was also mentioning that she didn't know who to root for because Napoleon's like really fun to see some of these new players come out, especially with so much emotion behind it. But at the same time, Jason, if you perform well in the past, you kind of want to see that consistency happen in Hearthstone as well.
Yeah, I think Deerjason actually played very well as well. You know, there wasn't anything particularly he could have done, especially in the last game. Just didn't quite have what he needed.
Right.
So I have no doubt he's still going to have a really, really strong chance to make it through the lower bracket.
Yeah, I was a little bit interested about the Alex Straza line. That was the only thing. He didn't really have the follow-up. He had the Archmage, which was a 2-turn thing, but his hand didn't really do anything else at that point. Yeah, I think he played fine.
Yeah, I think he just wanted to put on the pressure, right? And just play Alex Straza and
just
say to his opponent,
well.
say to his opponent, you have to deal with this and hope I don't have the burst to be able to survive.
And I think another thing that some people are picking up on these days is that a lot of players started having some post-mortem reflection upon their lineups, and a lot of them said, you know what, in hindsight, I think Zoo ended up being a big weak point of my lineup. I've heard a few players say that, both privately and also publicly. What do you guys think about that as a counterpoint? Because it felt like Zoo, once again, gave up some of these important matches, because every game really does matter, but it feels like Zoo used to be a very good deck to lead off, but it actually had a subpar win rate this tournament so far, according to TJ Stats.
TJ Stats.
Hashtag TJ Stats.
Yeah, I trust TJ Stats. It's the new Monk Stats, right? So, yeah,
goes well with his dad, bud.
Zoo's in an interesting spot. I mean, looking at this series, he has Zoo up against a Shaman deck that has no Lightning Storms in it, up against Rogue that he can out pressure. So I feel like Zoo should be well placed, but like you said, it just seems to be underperforming. I don't know whether to peg that to variance or whether there's something deeper than that. But yeah, it has been an underperforming deck in this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because Warlock's all over the place. It is the most represented class in terms of the 2 decks. You have Warlock and Reno Locks, and once like a Cthulhu Warlock thrown in the mix there. But
throw a Cthulhu in there for some fun.
Yeah, a lot of people put faith in the Zoo. I mean, even some of the players from the UK, they were saying like Zoo's a really good deck. Yeah. They said it's like still one of the most reliable fast decks. But it's interesting considering in the face of a lot of other decks which seem to line up pretty well against it. Hunter, for example, does usually have that good matchup against it. Pretty curious there. And I guess the last question that I want to throw out there is, what do you think some of these techs that we've seen included into some of the decks? We're looking at, for example, how Harrison Jones seems to be making an appearance in a lot of these decks. Do you feel like it's a really viable tournament choice, or in fact, it's a crucial tournament choice here, given the nature of all these weapon classes being represented in the meta?
Yeah, I think Harrison Jones is a really strong pick at the moment. Everyone's playing Warrior for a start, and Rogue is one of the, Miracle Rogue's one of the highest represented decks as well. So I think the benefit of that card is that when you play it against a weapon, it's obviously a huge swing. You get the card draw and a good body on the board. But even when you don't have that opportunity against some decks like Warlock a lot of the time without Drax, of course, when you just have to play it on curve, it's still actually a pretty good sized minion for the mana cost. And you can actually just squeeze that one card into a lot of decks, and sometimes it just wins you the game, as we saw earlier against the Doomhammer.
Yeah, I think the comparison to Azure Drake is very apt. You put it in your deck, sometimes it's just a huge blowout that simulates the effect of an Azure Drake. Sometimes it's an Azure Drake that doesn't draw you a card, but it has that extra point of stats. Most people who have Azure Drakes in their deck don't really have big blowout spell damage effects with it. It's just like a body that cycles. So there's not a big downside of putting it in your deck. And as you said, Rogue, Warrior, Shaman, Doomhammers, like there's so much that you can punish with it.
I think my favorite part about that game was it wasn't the Harrison land and the Doomhammer. It was the fact that Shaman actually had a really good start with the Tunnel Trog, the Totem Golem, although he did coin the Totem Golem. And he even had that Master Evolution on the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and yet Warrior still was able to come back. That was a really cool thing to see, because most of the time people's like, we just play minions on curve, you can't beat Shaman. It's not true, man. Some decks definitely have those good answers as well. So, good analysis and breakdown by Sodom and Raven. Once again, we're done with our second match. It is Napoleon who is qualifying. We have TJ standing by with some stats and an interview, ready to talk to our second winner.
Thanks, Dan. Don't have any stats, but I appreciate you guys giving me so much commendations on my statistics. Thank you very much. Yet Napoleon is the second player to qualify for the Spring Championship. On the back of another close series. That's the second close series we've seen today. I am joined with Napoleon for an interview. Napoleon, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, first off, man, I'm sure it's a big relief after that long series, but how are you feeling after qualifying for the Spring Championship?
Better.
Better, okay. Better is good. I want you to talk to me a little bit about your lineup. I remember you told me yesterday. You told me yesterday that you didn't think it was good.
My lineup is the worst possible lineup you can take for this event. It's an anti-control lineup, and all you see at this event is aggro, and it's aggro, and like I had to win 3 unfavorable series in a row to get here. Yeah.
How'd you come up with the Hunter list? Because the Hunter list was a little bit interesting with the Desert Camel and the Stranglethorn Tigers. Where'd you come up with that list? And do you think that deck served you well throughout the tournament?
Yeah, I used it to. The primary purpose of the Hunter deck is to beat the control matchups, and Rogue and Freeze Mage aren't that bad for it either.
Well, I mean, it served you well because you went all the way through the upper bracket without losing a single game. So it worked out pretty well. Was there any players that you want to give thanks to that helped you prepare a lot for this tournament, or any people you'd like to thank for supporting you along the way?
Okay. Shout to Brady, Jason Wolf, Butterface, Godkiller WX. I can't remember.
Well, I'm sure the players that you did name appreciate it a lot. I know some of those players: Brady, Godkiller WX, and Dacian Wolf. Those are all players who are strong on the North American ladder. So, big congratulations once again, Napoleon. I look forward to meeting you and seeing you play at the Spring Championship. Congratulations, man. Well, that's 2 series down for the day now. We still have 1 player left on the prediction board. For those of you who are just joining us, it is Nostum still left in there. But there's plenty of other strong players. And unlike the Europe preliminary, in the Americas preliminary, we have a lot of players who are sort of unknown. But hopefully we can build their stories up and get to know them a little bit more as we move on through the rest of the spring preliminary. But we are going to jump into the next match. It is just about ready, so we're going to head over to the desk to jump right into the action.